Have you ever stared at your phone, wondering why someone who clearly felt something for you suddenly became distant? One day they were warm, present, engaged, and the next, short replies, long silences, emotional distance you can't quite explain. It leaves you questioning everything. Did you say something wrong? Did they lose interest? Or worse, did they never care at all? But what if the problem isn't what you think it is? What if the distance you feel isn't rejection, but protection? Because people with avoidant attachment don't run from people they don't like. They run from emotional intensity they don't know how to handle. When connection starts getting deeper, their nervous system reacts before their mind does. It's automatic. Closeness begins to feel like pressure. Expectations feel like demands. And emotions begin to feel overwhelming. So they do the only thing their brain has learned to do to stay safe. They create distance, not because they don't care, but because caring too much activates alarms inside them that most people never see. This is why so many people trying to get close to an avoidant make the same mistake. They chase harder. They send longer messages. They ask for reassurance. They demand clarity. Why are you acting like this? Just tell me how you feel. Are you losing interest in me? Those questions feel normal to someone who wants connection. But to an avoidant, they feel like emotional pressure closing in from every side. And pressure triggers escape. The more you push, the further they pull away, which creates one of the most confusing dynamics in modern relationships. You move closer, they move back. You try harder, they disappear more. And eventually it begins to feel like you're talking to a wall. But here's the part almost nobody understands. Avoidants don't respond to pressure. They respond to safety. Their defenses aren't built to block love. They're built to block emotional overwhelm. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because there are certain words, certain types of messages, that don't activate their defenses at all. Instead of making them feel trapped, they make them feel safe. Instead of triggering distance, they create curiosity. Instead of pushing them away, they slowly invite them closer. This is where communication becomes incredibly powerful. Not loud communication, not emotional confrontation, but calm, grounded, emotionally intelligent words, the kind that quietly slip past their defenses, because avoidants are always scanning for one thing: pressure. If they feel it, they shut down. But if they sense emotional space, something interesting begins to happen. Their guard lowers just a little. They begin to relax, and once that tension disappears, they start engaging in ways that surprise even themselves. Conversations become easier, replies come faster, and the emotional distance begins shrinking in ways that once felt impossible. Not because you force them, not because you chase them, but because their nervous system no longer sees you as a threat to their independence. That's the paradox of avoidant behavior. The more someone tries to pull them closer, the further they run. But when someone communicates in a way that respects their emotional space, their defenses begin to soften, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first. And when that shift happens, something remarkable takes place. The person who once seemed emotionally unreachable starts opening up in ways you never expected. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, message by message, moment by moment. And once that wall begins to crack, you realize something important. They were never as closed off as they seemed. They were just waiting for someone who understood how to speak to the part of them that felt safe enough to finally listen. And the moment you understand that, your words start carrying a different kind of power, because an avoidant person isn't listening only to what you say. They are listening to how safe your words feel. Every message they receive goes through a silent filter in their mind. Does this feel like pressure? Does this feel like expectation? Does this feel like emotional demand? If the answer is yes, their defenses rise instantly. Replies become shorter, silence becomes longer, distance grows thicker. But when a message feels calm, grounded, free of pressure, something subtle happens inside them. Their nervous system relaxes. And when a person finally feels safe enough to relax, curiosity begins to replace fear. This is where the right kind of message becomes incredibly powerful. Not dramatic declarations, not emotional ultimatums, just a few simple words that quietly remove the tension they expect to feel. Imagine sending something that feels completely different from what they are used to. A message that says, "I know you've probably got a lot going on today, No rush to reply. Simple, calm, unbothered. But inside their mind, something unexpected happens. Instead of feeling chased, they feel respected. Instead of feeling cornered, they feel free. And freedom is the language an avoidant nervous system understands best. When someone senses that you're not trying to control their time, their emotions, or their attention, their guard softens just a little more, because they're used to people demanding access to their feelings. They're used to people pushing for deeper conversations before they feel ready. They're used to emotional intensity showing up faster than they can process it. So when someone approaches differently, it stands out. Your calm becomes intriguing. Your patience becomes noticeable. Your emotional steadiness becomes something they don't encounter often. And slowly, their mind begins asking a quiet question. Why does this person feel different? That question matters more than you might realize, because curiosity opens doors that pressure keeps locked. When someone feels curious about you, they start leaning in instead of stepping away. They begin to pay closer attention. They reread your messages. They notice the tone in your words. They feel the emotional space you're giving them. And in that space, something unexpected begins to grow. Trust. Not the loud kind people talk about, but the quiet kind. The kind that builds slowly through small moments where someone realizes they don't feel pushed. They don't feel judged. They don't feel emotionally trapped. This is incredibly important for someone who has spent most of their life protecting their independence. Because for many avoidant people, closeness has always come with a cost. Pressure, expectations, loss of personal space. So the moment they sense those patterns returning, their instinct is to retreat before things get too intense. But when those patterns never appear, their mind starts relaxing its defenses. They don't feel the need to run. They don't feel the urgency to escape. Instead, they stay. They engage. They reply. Sometimes faster than you expected. Sometimes with more openness than they've shown before. And this is the moment where many people make a critical mistake. They feel progress. They sense the connection growing. And suddenly they rush forward emotionally. They start asking deeper questions. They start pushing for reassurance. They start searching for confirmation that things are moving in the right direction. But to an avoidant mind, that sudden shift feels like the beginning of pressure again, the very thing they were starting to relax around. Which means the real power isn't just in sending the right message once. It's in maintaining the emotional atmosphere that made them feel safe in the first place. Calm, grounded, patient, because the more consistently someone feels that emotional safety around you, the more their defenses begin to weaken on their own, not through force, not through confrontation, but through repeated experiences where their nervous system learns something new. Being close to you doesn't mean losing themselves. Being connected to you doesn't mean losing control. And once that belief starts changing, the walls they spent years building stop feeling necessary. They begin lowering them piece by piece, not because they were convinced, but because for the first time in a long time, distance no longer feels like the safest option. And the deeper this safety settles in, the more something inside them begins to shift. Because for a long time, distance has been their strategy. Distance kept them in control. Distance protected their emotions. Distance prevented anyone from getting close enough to hurt them. So when they start feeling comfortable around someone, it creates a strange internal conflict. Part of them wants to stay guarded, but another part of them becomes curious about what connection could actually feel like without pressure. This is where the real breakthrough begins. Not when you ask them to open up, but when they start wanting to. And that desire rarely appears through emotional intensity. It appears through something far quieter. Understanding. Avoidants spend most of their lives feeling misunderstood. People call them cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. But inside their mind, the story feels very different. They often feel overwhelmed by emotions they were never taught how to express. They care deeply, but they process slowly. They feel attachment, but they fear dependence. They want connection, but they fear losing their freedom. So when someone sends a message that acknowledges who they are without trying to change them, it hits a place most people never reach. A message like, "I actually admire how independent you are," or "I like that you take your time with things." Those words may seem small, but to someone who constantly feels judged for being distant, they land differently. They feel seen. And when someone feels seen without being criticized, something powerful begins to happen. Their defenses stop working so hard, because the wall they built was never designed to block love. It was designed to block shame. The shame of being misunderstood. The shame of being told they're too distant, too guarded, too difficult to love. So when someone approaches them with acceptance instead of frustration, their mind begins to relax in ways it rarely does. They stop preparing for conflict. They stop expecting emotional demands. And slowly, they begin showing pieces of themselves that were hidden before. Not dramatic confessions, not sudden emotional vulnerability, just small openings, a slightly longer message, a more thoughtful response, a moment where they share something personal without being asked. These moments are easy to overlook, but they matter more than you realize. Because for someone who built their identity around emotional self-protection, every small moment of openness feels like a risk, and risks only happen when safety is strong enough to hold them. This is why patience becomes one of the most powerful forces in this entire dynamic. Not passive waiting, but calm emotional steadiness. The kind that says, without words, that you're not here to force anything. You're simply present, and presence has a strange effect on avoidant hearts, because they are used to people leaving once things become emotionally complicated. They are used to people growing frustrated with their pace. They are used to people demanding deeper connection before they're ready. So when someone stays grounded instead of reactive, it begins rewriting a belief they've carried for years. The belief that closeness always comes with pressure. Every calm interaction weakens that belief a little more. Every patient response makes their nervous system trust the connection a little deeper. And eventually, a moment arrives where the distance that once felt necessary no longer feels needed. They begin leaning toward the connection instead of protecting themselves from it. They start initiating conversations. They share thoughts they usually keep private. They show curiosity about you in ways they once held back. And that's when you realize something most people never understand about avoidant people. They were never incapable of deep connection. They were simply waiting for a connection that didn't feel like it would consume them. A connection that allowed them to stay themselves while still feeling close to someone else. And when they finally experience that kind of emotional space, the walls they spent years building stop feeling like protection. They start feeling like barriers to something they secretly wanted all along. And when those barriers begin to fall, something else starts happening beneath the surface. They begin watching you more closely, not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic way, but quietly. They start paying attention to how you react to distance, how you respond to silence, how you carry yourself when emotions get complicated. Because for an avoidant mind, trust is not built through words. It's built through patterns. They study patterns the way someone studies weather before stepping outside. They look for signs of pressure, signs of control, signs that closeness will eventually turn into something overwhelming. And if those signs appear, the walls rise again, faster than before. But when those signs never show up, something inside them begins to soften in a way they didn't expect. Because the world they've experienced has taught them something very specific. That closeness always comes with emotional demands. That love eventually asks for more than they feel ready to give. That someone, at some point, will try to pull them deeper than they can handle. So they prepare for it. They anticipate the moment when the tone of the conversation changes, when patience turns into frustration, when understanding turns into pressure. But when that moment never arrives, confusion begins to replace their fear. And confusion opens the door to something powerful: curiosity. They start wondering why being around you feels different, why conversations with you feel calm instead of draining, why your presence doesn't trigger the same instinct to pull away. This curiosity slowly pulls them closer, not because you ask them to, but because their mind wants to understand the difference. And this is where something incredibly important begins to happen. Their guard drops low enough for vulnerability to appear, not the dramatic kind people imagine, not long emotional confessions, just small pieces of truth, a sentence about something that bothered them recently, a thought they usually keep to themselves, a moment where they reveal something personal without hiding behind humor or distance. These moments are quiet, but they are powerful, because every time someone with avoidant patterns shares something real, they are stepping outside of their emotional comfort zone. They are testing whether the connection is strong enough to hold their honesty. And the way you respond in these moments matters more than anything you said before. If your reaction feels overwhelming, if it feels like you're pushing them to go deeper too fast, the walls begin rebuilding instantly. But if your response stays calm, steady, and grounded, something remarkable happens. They begin trusting the connection at a deeper level. They realize they can share something personal without losing control of the interaction. They realize vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to emotional chaos. And that realization begins changing the way they experience closeness. For the first time, connection starts feeling less like a threat and more like a choice. This is the turning point most people never reach, because many people lose patience long before this moment arrives. They want fast emotional clarity. They want reassurance. They want confirmation that the connection is moving somewhere meaningful. But an avoidant person moves through connection at a completely different pace, not because they lack feelings, but because their nervous system processes intimacy differently. And the people who understand this difference are the ones who unlock something extraordinary. They become the rare presence that doesn't activate the avoidant instinct to escape. They become the person who represents calm instead of pressure, safety instead of demand, space instead of emotional control. And when someone begins associating you with that kind of emotional environment, the dynamic changes in a way most people never experience. Because suddenly, you are no longer someone they are trying to keep distance from. You become someone they feel strangely drawn to, not through force, not through persuasion, but through the quiet realization that being close to you doesn't require them to stop being themselves. And for someone who has spent years protecting their independence, that realization feels like discovering a completely different version of connection, one where closeness doesn't feel like a trap, but like freedom shared with someone who finally understands them. And the moment that realization begins to settle inside them, the dynamic shifts again in a way that is almost invisible at first. They stop holding the door half closed, not wide open yet, but no longer locked, because something inside them is starting to understand that closeness with you doesn't automatically mean losing their freedom. And for someone who has lived most of their life protecting their independence, that discovery feels powerful. It feels unfamiliar. It feels intriguing. This is where the smallest messages can suddenly carry enormous weight, because when an avoidant begins leaning closer emotionally, their mind becomes extremely sensitive to signals. They are asking themselves silent questions. Is this connection safe enough to grow? Will this person suddenly demand more than I can give? Will closeness slowly turn into pressure? And every word you send answers those questions, whether you realize it or not. One message can reinforce safety. Another can bring the walls right back up. That's why the most powerful texts are never dramatic. They are steady, grounded, emotionally calm. A message like this lands differently than most people realize. I enjoy talking with you. No expectations, just saying. It sounds simple, but to someone who fears emotional traps, it feels like oxygen, because it carries warmth without pressure, interest without demand, connection without control. And that combination is incredibly rare. When they read something like that, their mind relaxes again. They feel the space inside the connection. They feel that they are not being pulled somewhere they didn't choose. And suddenly the conversation becomes something they want to return to, not because they feel obligated, but because it feels good, because it feels safe. And the more often someone experiences that feeling around you, the more their nervous system starts associating you with emotional calm. You become the opposite of what their defenses were built to fight. You become the rare person who doesn't try to rush their process. And this is where something almost magical begins to happen. They start initiating, small at first. A random message, a comment about something you talked about before, a question that shows they were thinking about you. These moments may seem ordinary on the surface, but for someone who normally protects their emotional distance, they are huge, because every time they reach out first, they are stepping closer to connection on their own terms. That matters more than anything you could force, because forced closeness always feels temporary. Chosen closeness feels real. And once an avoidant begins choosing the connection instead of avoiding it, the entire energy changes. The silence becomes shorter. The conversations become more natural. They start revealing pieces of themselves without feeling like they are losing control. You might notice something else, too. Their tone shifts. It becomes warmer, more relaxed, more present. That's the moment when you realize the wall that once felt impossible to break wasn't destroyed by pressure. It was dissolved by safety, by patience, by emotional steadiness. And the truth is, very few people ever learn how to create that kind of space. Most people react to distance with frustration. They chase harder. They demand clarity. They push for reassurance. But pressure only strengthens the defenses avoidance already live behind. What weakens those defenses is something far more powerful. Consistency, calm energy, words that respect their pace instead of fighting it. Because the deeper truth is this: avoidants are not afraid of love. They are afraid of losing themselves inside it. But when someone proves, through every interaction, that connection can exist without control, something extraordinary happens. The person who once felt emotionally unreachable begins opening in ways that surprise even them. The walls they relied on start feeling unnecessary. The distance they protected begins fading. And in its place, something far more powerful begins to grow. Trust. Not loud, not rushed, but steady. And once that kind of trust takes root, the same person who once pulled away from closeness begins doing something completely different. They stop running. They stay. And when they finally stop running, even just a little, the shift is deeper than it looks. Because staying is not easy for someone who built their entire emotional system around distance. Staying means risk. Staying means feeling. Staying means allowing someone to see parts of them they've spent years hiding. So when an avoidant begins staying in the connection instead of escaping it, something important is happening inside them. Their fear is losing its grip, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, moment by moment. And this is where your energy becomes the deciding factor in what happens next. Because when someone starts lowering their defenses, they are incredibly sensitive to what they experience in return. They are watching closely, listening closely, feeling the emotional tone behind every word. If they sense pressure creeping in again, the old instincts wake up immediately. The instinct to protect, the instinct to withdraw, the instinct to disappear before things become too intense. But when the energy remains calm, steady, respectful of their pace, their trust deepens in ways they never expected. They start realizing something that challenges everything they believed about closeness. That intimacy doesn't have to feel suffocating. That connection doesn't have to come with emotional control. That being close to someone doesn't mean losing their independence. This realization is powerful because it unlocks a part of them that has been guarded for years. The part that secretly wanted connection but never felt safe enough to fully experience it. And when that part begins waking up, their behavior changes. Not dramatically, but undeniably. They become more present in conversations. They share thoughts that once stayed locked inside their mind. They ask about you in ways that show real curiosity, not because they feel obligated, but because they want to know. Because now the connection feels like something they are choosing. And choice is everything to an avoidant mind. When closeness feels forced, it triggers resistance. When closeness feels chosen, it creates attachment. That difference changes everything, because the moment someone feels that they are free to stay or leave, something surprising happens. They begin choosing to stay more often. They start leaning toward the connection instead of protecting themselves from it. And the more they lean in, the more they discover something they didn't expect. That closeness with the right person doesn't drain them. It doesn't trap them. It doesn't demand pieces of themselves they aren't ready to give. Instead, it feels balanced, safe, grounded. And that feeling becomes addictive in the quietest way. Not the intense emotional rush people often mistake for love, but something deeper. A calm sense that this connection doesn't threaten who they are. And when someone with avoidant patterns experiences that kind of emotional environment, their walls begin dissolving in ways they never thought possible. The distance that once defined them fades. The silence that once protected them softens. The guarded version of themselves slowly transforms into someone more open, more relaxed, more present. Not because they were forced to change, but because they finally encountered a connection that didn't require them to defend themselves. This is the truth most people never understand. Avoidants don't need to be chased. They don't need to be convinced. They don't need someone constantly trying to break their defenses. What they need is something far more powerful. Someone who doesn't trigger those defenses in the first place. someone whose presence feels calm instead of demanding, someone whose words feel grounding instead of overwhelming. Because when that kind of connection appears in their life, the walls they spent years maintaining stop feeling necessary. They realize something they may have never experienced before: that closeness can exist without pressure, that intimacy can exist without control, that love can exist without losing themselves. And once that realization becomes real inside them, something extraordinary happens. The same person who once pulled away from connection begins protecting it. The same person who once feared emotional closeness begins valuing it. The same person who once kept their heart guarded begins allowing it to open. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. And when that moment arrives, you see the truth that was hidden behind every wall they built. They were never afraid of connection. They were only afraid of the wrong kind. But when the right kind finally appears, the defenses that once seemed unbreakable quietly fall away, revealing someone who was capable of deep connection all along.